Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion. My name is Edith, and again, the chattering teacup sends her regards. So does our CEO, and so do our PAs. Everyone is busy, 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 and so am I. Dear listeners, dear subscribers, today I do not only have one guest, but two guests from across the pond. And here they are. Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion, Owen and Paul.
Hello, good to be here.
Lovely to have you. Owen Greenwald and Paul Kivelson, authors of, I would call it the beginning of an interesting space opera, Weapons of the Mind, book 1 in the Renegades trilogy. Gentlemen, before we dive into your writing process and into your collaboration, which I find most fascinating, what can you tell us about book number 1 in the trilogy?
What? Do you want to start by?
Sure. Weapons of the Mind is kind of our love letter to classic science fiction. The golden age when the stakes were high and the heroes and villains were larger than life and planets were big, unexplored, unique settings that people just let their imaginations run wild to come up with. And just about anything is possible in this universe. We've got, magical powers. We've got strange aliens with unique ways of thinking. We've got grand adventures. We've got a team of unlikely heroes coming together and kind of creating their own little family unit as they struggle with everything we're putting them through. They're on the run, and our hero has to kind of prove her innocence. She's been framed for this crime, and she's kind of unraveling the plot of why this happened to her and how she can clear her name.
Yeah, I think going in, one thing that the book 1 is really sort of focuses on is this sort of sense of exploration and discovery, that it's a story, as Owen said, of a big universe and these characters sort of exploring it along with the readers and finding that what's over the next horizon and where will they go next, what will they see.
You said, Owen, it's more or less classic sci-fi. Do you have a favorite?
Well, my greatest love is and always will be Star Wars, and I think that will be obvious to anyone who reads it, honestly, because that's where a good chunk of the inspiration came from. Of course, we've tried to do our own thing with it, but kind of the seeds are there. And Paul and I, when we were writing it, which I know we'll get into later, we spent probably at least as much time talking about Star Wars as we did actually writing the book. Because when we were writing it, the new movies were just coming out, so there was a lot of new stuff to talk about after years and years of only having the original 6 movies to talk about, and so that was kind of on our minds.
Yeah, we felt that it was a motivator in writing it, enough out there of this kind of science fiction, but with that kind of fantastical element, that, sort of hero's journey, again, that discovery, that, as Owen said, that sort of old school space opera adventure, big galaxy, and both of us love reading that type of thing. And there hadn't been a lot of more recent works, literary works that we had found that sort of catered to that and fed to that, and we wanted to try our hand at it.
And now I'm frozen again. Oh, fantastic, isn't it? It's always the same with my camera. I don't know why, but you can still hear me.
Yes, we hear
and
you.
And I don't look so bad. Not my idiotic self. Not my idiotic self.
It's actually a really nice pose.
Yes, the thinker pose. You said you're both Star Wars fan. I have to admit I'm a Trekkie. What can I say?
That's okay. Star Trek is great too.
I am also a big Stargate fan. If we're going through, that was the one that I always. It's a little out there, a little silly, but good character.
No, I do understand because it was a great show, absolutely. And we said
Star Trek is it's just it's very optimistic, right? I really like that about it, is that it kind of paints a future of paints a picture of what the future could be.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the vision of it, and I appreciate kind of the more nuanced take on what a future society might look like, as opposed to, people running around swashbuckling. So
yeah, absolutely true. I always liked Star Trek, and I always thought that Gene Roddenberry has done a wonderful job imagining a positive, a utopian future.
Yeah, and those positive things that he envisioned helped move things forward here on Earth as well, I think, which is always a great aspect of science fiction, when it can accurately portray a future that we aren't quite ready for and then help us get there.
True, absolutely true.
And it's hard to write a compelling story where that optimism and that sort of utopian runs through, because conflict is so central to so much of narrative, and still being able to capture compelling conflict, week a week, episode to episode, well, keeping that, I think, is no easy feat.
And before we started the recording, I said I found it fascinating that you two wrote this book together. What can you tell me about your writing process in particular? Because, like I said, writing a book on your own is sometimes quite a challenge. But working on a book together, and I am right to say that you do not live next to each other, next door. So,
well, we used to live pretty close to each other,
but not next.
So much anymore.
Still,
no,
a 10-minute drive.
Okay. So how
but
did it work out?
It is funny that we're going right from the topic of every story needing conflict into this story, because there was some conflict for sure.
Yeah. Okay. I think there was a lot of naivety going in. You have this notion that if you have two people, you just divide up the work and it's twice as easy. We had both graduated college with English degrees, writing focus, wanting to write, and been longtime friends, and said, hey, we both want to do this. There's similar types of books we both want to see. This seems like a no-brainer, without really respecting what a challenge and complex thing it is to try to write a book with another person.
So our original plan was just to kind of divide up the chapters, one for you, one for me, and there wasn't really any cohesive theme to who got which chapters. It was just kind of we'll divide them up kind of chronologically, and then we'll piece them together, and we'll see what happens. And what that kind of resulted in was a story where we were very reluctant to step on each other's toes, because we weren't 100% sure we were on the same page yet. So we would kind of leave details about the world or about the characters or about the plot kind of blank when we, came across something that we hadn't already discussed, because, we wanted to leave room for the other person to have made that decision. And it led to a world that was kind of empty feeling, like there wasn't anything going on in it, because the only thing that was there was stuff that we had explicitly discussed, and we were kind of writing around the absence of everything else rather than having the freedom to come up with it in the moment.
That was something we had to learn, how to accept and push on each other.
Yeah, I'm wondering, because okay, you divided the chapters between the two of you, but what about the preparation for the book? I mean, like I said, when you work on a book on your own, all you have to fight with is your own mind, your own ideas, and if you get stuck, you only have to inspirate yourself. But how did that work out in preparing? Where did you start? How did you start? I'm always wondering about such things.
Yeah, so we had this notion that we both wanted to write this kind of classic space opera. Again, there wasn't as much catering to that, and then we came up. So we had this sort of genre and idea that we wanted to write to, and then we came up with a whole bunch of pitches for plots, and we sat together and we sort of bounced them back and forth, and we had the Google Doc, and so we could collaborate both in person and not, and we kind of bounced ideas off each other. And it that is one thing that's worked out very well about our writing process, is that Owen tends to be very methodical. I think he uses the scientific method to describe his writing thing,
Yeah,
right.
I like to make ideas prove themselves before I entertain them. So it's very hard for me to be creative because I'm constantly like subjecting all my ideas to kind of this stress test, and I won't really talk about anything I'm thinking about until after I'm sure it's an okay idea.
Whereas I am just sort of like throw 1,000 ideas out there and see what looks the most interesting to me. So it uh, we fed off each other well in this way. I would sort of blast a whole bunch of ideas at Owen, and he would tell me no.
So,
Yeah, it's 999 of them, uh, and. And he was very good natured about it and really helped sort of take and refine and pull out the best characters, the best pitches, add his own twist, fix a lot of the problems and other stuff. So it was
well,
really kind
Paul
of,
says I was good natured, but I don't know. It takes a lot of goodwill to listen to all your ideas get shot down one by one when I'm not really contributing much myself. And I'm really grateful that you were able to do that, because I don't know if I can do that, because it takes so much effort and investment for me to come up with one idea that it's a lot harder for me to see one go down. And they did go down. Like, it wasn't a one-sided thing for sure.
yeah.
Mm.
We had a whole bunch of different pitches, and then once we finally found um the main character kind of came with the idea. We uh we found the story we wanted. The original version of the book actually had both an A and a B plot. So we also had a whole bunch of pitches for a B plot. Um, in the publication process, we were told by people agents, publishers we'd reach out to, that as debut authors with the B plot, the book was a little too long. So we had to take it back and rework it. So we lost the B plot in the final version, although we do plan to do some stuff with what we'd written there, because there are some good, compelling characters and interesting world details there. But um, we wrote after that. It was nothing too surprising. Character kind of Bible, a bunch of
Mhm.
information for our main characters, trying to flesh them out,
Mhm.
and outline not just for book one, but we also wanted to scope out the arc of the
Mhm.
trilogy, and trilogy, so we could set up a lot of um, narrative elements, because both of us do like sort of the long setup for a really good payoff. And there's something, if you read
There's
the
some good
series,
payoff.
there's
we
some
So,
we
good payoff.
definitely we
yeah, okay.
definitely knew where it was going before we started.
Okay,
So
so did I understand you correctly that you not only had this plan for book two, but when you started out, you already had thoughts or in the back of your mind for the whole trilogy?
yes.
Yeah. We didn't outline each of all three of the books at
Mm-hmm.
that point, but we had, these are the major plot elements. This is where the story is going. These are the
Mm-hmm.
secrets is the book that these secrets will get revealed in.
Mhm.
Of course, lots of stuff changed. It talked about the character. It's always shocking to look back just how different. The two of us have a joke amongst ourselves because so many characters were lost through the revision process that there's some metaphorical bar out there where all of our characters are sitting waiting for they got cut shot to return to the page, commiserating over not making it into the final version. It's sort of this bar of extraneous characters, but
Okay, and coming back not only to the plot, but like you said, to the characters, the ideas for the characters, your main character, and all the other supportive cast, so to speak. Where did they come from? Where did you find them?
Let's start with Tala because she's our main character, and I think she's got the most interesting story in terms of development, because a lot of where she came from was our desire to kind of work with a type of protagonist that you don't often see in kind of a new story. There are tropes that both Paul and I, as big readers, are very familiar with, and that we've read a lot of times, and we wanted to avoid that. And one of those things is the idea of kind of this inexperienced protagonist who has to ask a lot of questions about the world that they're thrust into, who has this kind of mentor figure who says, "Oh, this is that," so that you can kind of tell the audience that. But we consciously set out. We said, okay, we're going to have a character who belongs in the world, who's got some experience, who understands kind of the basic principles and can be competent within this setting without having to kind of explain a lot of things to the reader along the way. So,
but we still want the reader to understand what's going on, which was the tricky part, of course.
Yeah. So we kind of came up with the idea of this character who's kind of a very promising kind of postgraduate of this kind of pseudo-philosophical order that we came up with as part of the world building package. She's been on some missions. She's well regarded, and we also wanted a protagonist who wasn't confident in what they were doing necessarily. Someone who is constantly like doubting themselves and kind of fighting this battle, not only against external enemies, but also in her own head, and that worked less well in our original draft. We had to do a lot of revision to get that working, and I think Paul can talk a bit more about that process.
Yeah, so it's one of those sort of things you have a good idea to challenge a trope or subvert, or play up, but sometimes those are commonalities for a reason. And when the protagonist is constantly pushing against the plot and needs all the other characters to push them forward, we found that it made a very unengaging protagonist. So that was definitely a shift as we wrote through it, as we sort of collaborated. We're like, we got to change this. We do want to keep that internal conflict, that weighing of revenge versus justice. Is what they're doing the right thing, the wrong thing? These harsh sort of truths they're beginning to discover about everything they thought they understood about the galaxy at large. But at the same time, the main character shouldn't, of course, be playing into the action and pushing the story forward. So we that was a big shift. We realized, well, we could push back on some tropes. Sometimes it doesn't work as well.
She became a much more dynamic figure in terms of actively wanting the plot to happen and pushing it forward, where before that was kind of the job of the other people in the story.
And did you also become more detailed along with writing the draft? Or did you feel at the beginning she wasn't that well fleshed out, and going along with your writing that she became more fleshed out as a character?
I think the protagonist actually, I mean, other than changing a lot of characters, the
Mhm.
protagonist came through pretty clearly even in the earlier drafts.
Okay.
It was a lot of the side characters that I
Mhm.
think really saw that growth from draft to draft, because really working on their arcs, how they play off Tala, the main character, how they have their own journey, because they're not just, we didn't want them to
Yeah.
once their side characters to be props, they want them to be agents too, interesting characters too. Readers can uh connect with those side characters too, and I think it was the side characters that really developed and got filled in.
Yeah, and you just discover things about these characters as you're
Yeah.
writing about, like in the scene. There's one scene that I can talk a little bit about,
Please do.
which is that the protagonist Tala, she's got this kind of piece of artwork that she's trying to kind of decipher the meaning of, because she was given this piece of artwork and told that it would have some kind of relevance to her life, and she hasn't really figured out what the person who gifted it to her means by that, and so she kind of keeps this painting on hand, kind of in the background, and she encounters this other character, one of the side characters, an ally on her quest, kind of in her room, and I'm writing this scene, and suddenly I realize, oh, this guy would be really into art, which wasn't originally part of the character that we'd outlined for him, and suddenly I was like, all right, like here's what's going to happen as a result of that, and then in revisions I could go back and kind of that greater understanding of the character would influence all of his scenes, even if they weren't, about art necessarily. Suddenly I have this kind of more three-dimensional picture of the character to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also found it great that you put in humor in the interaction between Tala and the new characters or the new people she encounters on her quest for the truth, what happened, and it makes it a bit more light-hearted. I mean, this is a hard time for her, and there's a lot going on, a lot of fighting and a lot of danger. But in between, you managed to put in this humorous part, and I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I think I think that's really an essential piece of that swashbuckling energy that we're going for, because you're right, these are hard things that she's going through, and we didn't want to. I mean, in life, there are people who are going through bad times and hard times,
Yeah.
and they still have that desire to find joy in the small parts of their life, and not let the tragedy that they're going through define them. And so, yeah, we wanted to make sure that we be counterbalanced the danger and the betrayal with just the ability to keep things light and moving forward.
Yeah.
And
Right.
we both like to laugh, so I think our characters kind of like to laugh too, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. I think that you can't appreciate the dark moments without lighter moments.
True.
You have this really dark story, but if the whole story is dark and sadness and struggle, then the reader gets complacent with it, gets bored with it. You need that contrast, I think, really, to make the adversity stand out.
Have this lighter touch in between the hard stuff. Yeah. And I spoke to the teacup before we came on the phone, the listeners, of course. And we always talk about the books we have on the show, and I can't even imagine how any of that works, how you come up with all the ideas and so on. She loves to read those books as well, and it's always fascinating. You said, working together, having a role model in classic sci-fi and so on. And there's so much in this book. There's so much of new species. There are new planets. And there's also this, like you said, Owen, this order where Tala is a member of, or was a member of. And all these ideas come so perfectly together. And this philosophy, you said, this is pseudo-philosophy, but it is a kind of philosophy. To make that work, and it does work, and it pulls you in, this story of yours. I mean, it's incredible, it's fascinating, and it's a wonder that the book isn't 1,000 pages, because there is so much. There is so much in there, and there's so much we want to know. And like you said, okay, it's a trilogy, but still, even book one, how much did you need to leave out in book one? And which will not feature in 2 and 3, because otherwise you have, I don't know, 3,000 pages.
Yeah, but we're actually sorry. Yeah, before I answer the question, or before Paul answers the question, rather, because I saw him about to go. We are outlining book 2 right now, and we're already looking at each other and saying this is going to be huge. Like I don't know how we're going to put everything we have in this outline into a number of pages that publishers will publish.
He gets with the idea phase, cutting down a lot of my ideas. I get him once it's on the page. I go, it's getting kind of long. I think we got to cut this paragraph and this sentence and this thing. And so he's a good sport about that too, Beck. So we each sort of get to bring the axe sometimes. But honestly, that there are a lot of challenges of collaboration, some of which we touched on, some of which we haven't. But that I think is an advantage of, you have 2 people coming up with ideas, but also 2 people playing off each other's ideas. Owen will have an idea about food processing, units that can make food. And then I'll go,
wait.
How do restaurants?
Yeah.
Well, how do restaurants work if that exists? And I'll go, okay, that's an interesting question. And then we'll have a discussion, and you can play off someone. And obviously, you can follow that line on your own. You could come up with that idea and then lead to that idea. But there's something very organic and easy with being able to play off of another person. And
really, like, it's one thing to ask yourself questions about something, but it really does force you to think when someone else is asking questions about something. I like to think of life as, or not life, but kind of, I guess, society as a collection of systems that have built up over time in such a way that a lot of the people who live in them take them for granted. Even Paul said restaurants, just like the idea of going out to eat and having, all this choice and selection and ordering off a menu and then having people bring you the food and then even just tipping at the end. Like, those are all social constructions that we've learned to inhabit. I know you're not in America. I don't know what your tipping culture is like. Probably a lot less pronounced, but it's not taken for granted other places. It's something that we came up with, and so that's how I like to approach the worlds that I come up with as well. There's a reason for why all this stuff exists, even if we don't go into it in the book. There's a history there, and the character questioning that history because they've been brought up with it. But Paul and I have questioned it, and spent probably a lot more time than we needed to in the process.
Yeah. You want to know? We talked about holidays and other stuff. I mean, honestly, part of that came from fun. I think you have to enjoy that, and sort of coming up with these world details with my friend together collaboratively. That was one of the more really fun parts of the book. But also, the book went back and forth so many times because we really wanted to match style and tone and rewrite each other's chapters back and forth and make sure to get the books to both of us and blend our styles. That when you're passing it back and forth, each time each person is going to sprinkle in a few more little details, have a few more ideas, and some little details are going to get cut. They'll still be present in the world, but there won't be space on the page for them.
Yeah.
And So I think a lot of that came from that sort of passing back and forth.
Mm,
Is it okay? Is it okay if I plug something real quick?
yeah. Go on.
So we have the book, which we've talked about, kind of the world building details that aren't
Mhm.
there, and then the book has that appendix in the back that kind of gives you kind of a more fleshed out ability to look into this stuff. If you're so inclined, you don't need to do it, but it's there if you want to take that dive. But I also have a page on my website, which is owenbgreenwald.com, called the GIAB portal. The GIAB is this, it's kind of like the CIA of this universe. Their job is to collect data and analyze it for the good of the government. And so I have this page on my website where if you go to the GIAB portal and you click on the little kind of interface, it'll serve you just kind of a random fact about the galaxy that isn't really necessarily connected to anything in the story, but has some relevance to one of the things that you read about. And I've got like 400 facts. It gives you a random one each time you click on it. And it's just my way of trying to share as much information about the world as I can in a format that people will maybe find fun and not overbearing.
That brings me to the question of the science in your fiction, because we had a live stream on that question about the
Yes.
science in fiction and how much is enough. Shall we tone it down? My guests agreed, no, we shouldn't. And also we have to be consistent with what we write. Of course, also in fantasy, also in science fiction, with what you write. And how much science is enough science? How much is too much? Is it ever too much? Gentlemen, what is your take?
Well, so I think that it's important to, as you said, be consistent. If you establish that this is a world of very hard facts and science and what the ground rules are, and then change them without explanation, that's, I think, when you run into problems. If you explain everything as you go and then you wave your hands over some stuff, that's, I think, where you run into challenges. But if you set up the expectation with the reader that, okay, we're going to make this make as much sense as we can, but obviously we don't understand how to make a functional spaceship. We're not scientists.
But
We
we
do our
based
best.
somewhat in fact.
Yeah,
We don't
yeah.
really get into it in the story. Paul's dad is a physicist at Stanford, so
We
he
we
kind
did
of
ask him quite a few things. We were like, okay, we need to have some valuable thing that could be related to space travel. What sort of elements could they mine? He's like, oh, I don't know. I guess I could do this. You could suggest some things and ran some things. But I guess what I'm just trying to say is, if you're writing sort of more hard science fiction, it's important to keep that solid throughout. We took the tact of, our world has some more fantastical elements, has some more has these fantastical elements, but we want it to make sense within itself. So where we can, the science should make sense as much as we can make it, and the fantastical elements are fantastical, and we acknowledge that and try to explain it as much as we can without overwhelming the reader.
much like with Star Wars, our inspiration. I kind of almost hesitate to classify this as science fiction because it really is more of a fantasy story with a futuristic setting. I'm a big fan of stories where authors have clearly worked through the science, and I think doing that work can open up story possibilities and have create something that readers can really appreciate. I'm a huge fan of The Expanse, where they've clearly thought a lot about the particulars of the world, and there's an entire scene in one chapter of The Expanse, or they're in this fight, this ship-wide, this ship-to-ship fight, and a wrench hasn't been secured, And it's just this tiny little detail. They didn't have to have the wrench be unsecured, but it becomes kind of this whole new dimension of the fight scene where every time the ship swerves, the wrench is following physics and creating problems. And that's just such a rich thing to read about. And I really admire that. But yeah, that's not really the type of story that we were trying to tell. We were trying to tell a story about kind of this fantastical universe. And I think I like my fantastical universes. I want to think about them a little more than Star Wars does. And I was aware of this in myself as I was writing this. And I knew if I let myself focus on the science, I'll get bogged down. I'll do it too much. So I'm going to do it as little as possible, knowing that my natural inclination is going to bend toward putting some of it in anyway. And hopefully, if I do that, it'll lead to us having the perfect amount. Because, I'll start writing and then I'll think about, wait a second, like, these planets all have different gravities. Like, wouldn't the characters be constantly feeling one way or another? Like, on these planets, like wouldn't you feel you have to write like Tala feels lighter the entire time on this one? I was like, okay, I have to come up with that. Like, what if she lands on a planet where it's nighttime but she just woke up? So just like all those little questions about kind of the mundane details that one would consider in life, I would kind of fix on and need to address in some way, which I mean Star Wars doesn't even do that really, but in a world with all this fantastical technology, we didn't think of the numbers. We didn't calculate like the kilojoules of whatever science thing and how big the battery needs to be. Like, we didn't do anything like that, but we did try to ground our world whenever possible in what a world that contained these technologies would look like.
Yeah, like an example he said is we have centralized standard time, which is people work off 2 times, the planet they're on's time and the sort of center of the galaxy, the kind of capital of this society, its time, because you would need this uniform time when, different size planets, different things would have different day-night
Business
cycle.
Mhm.
And yeah, so we try to address the ones that we could and make it as rich as possible without sort of distracting from this character-driven journey.
Mm. And would you say that the description or what they did to Tala and her comrades is also a mixture of sci-fi and fantasy? A teeny tiny bit? These enhancements, this body modification and put together with these enhancements of the mind and how they use the philosophy?
Yeah. So, there is definitely with the enhancement to that was one we did try to understand something. I mean, it explicitly does break some of the laws of physics, and we explore what the effects of that are to some extent. But we tried to think of what some of this would mean. Like, we had a whole long discussion about fire and putting out fire through enhancement, because we had written this scene one way where you could enhance how did it go on the original version with
I don't remember enhancement. We that also went through a lot of revisions. We were changing the rules of it in an attempt to make it make, because it is a little too broad of a system. I think it gives the protagonist too.
So we had to want to be able to put out this fire, and then we talked to some people who were early readers, and they're like, "Well, this doesn't. I mean, it's fine, but this doesn't really how this would work scientifically." And as I said, we were obsessing, but when somebody tells you, "Hey, you did something that's explicitly not right," that's when you go, "Okay, how can we look back and make this make sense?" So again, I think it's one of those things where it's as much as we could, we did. And whenever we could think of something interesting that would enrich the world and track as much with it, we tried to feed into that. And I think that's true for the body enhancements, mental enhancements plays into the story, the drama, and yeah.
And even for things that do break physics, like one example is faster than light travel. Like enhancement
Mhm.
is how you do light travel in our universe. We did come up with a reason for why that would be the case. We're probably never going to go into it in one of the books, but we did kind of talk about why it works that way and what's going on behind the scenes to allow that.
Mhm. Yeah, but that's absolutely fine. Like we said, as long as you keep it consistent, there shouldn't be a problem with it. And this genre mix, let's call it that. I mean, I know publishers and bookshops like labels, and where shall we put it on the
Oh yeah,
shelf? Yes,
and
but
agents like comp
yeah.
titles.
Yeah, but we readers, we enjoy mixtures, and like you said, keep it consistent, keep the science in, have ideas that go beyond what we know. That's the beauty of writing sci-fi and fantasy, and that's what makes it so fascinating. These new ideas, these new concepts, new species, new planets.
Definitely,
Yeah,
definitely.
new plot. Yeah, I did get a little frustrated during the process of submission and agenting because I felt like everyone was trying to fit our story into a box.
Yeah,
How could we package this? How can
yeah.
we convince readers to try it based on things they've tried and enjoyed before? And the entire time I was thinking, well, I wrote this because I didn't see it on any shelves. Like this is something that I
Yeah.
want to read that I don't see really a direct analog to, other than like, as I mentioned before, like it's really based on Star Wars, but you can't use Star Wars
Yeah.
as a comp title. Like people will laugh at you or get upset or they want recent stuff. They want stuff that isn't too big and isn't too small, and it's a very restrictive process.
Mhm.
And I found myself kind of it was hard to find titles that matched what I felt we'd done.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a pain. Like you said, everyone wants to put you in a box, wants to pigeonhole you. Put your book, like we said, in a genre and then put it on the shelf. And I guess that's also why lots of authors, even traditionally published authors these days, tend to do a mix of staying with a publishing house and going independent.
Hmm. But
Definitely.
even the books that do get put in boxes, I feel like they also love these mixes, right? Because
Yeah.
a classic advertisement or comp strategy will be like, this book is what happens when you mix these two popular things, like
Yeah.
Aragon meets Harry Potter, and suddenly you have Fourth Wing. Uh,
Yeah, interesting thought, by the way. Hmm, that has absolute potential.
yeah, there's actually a story that I really enjoy, which is Jim Butcher,
Yeah.
who wrote the Dresden Files. He was at some convention giving a talk about how ideas are kind of not the hardest part of the process. You can have bad ideas, but as long as you write them well,
Mhm.
people will still find them compelling. And kind of as part of that, he just kind of solicited two ideas from the crowd, just at random. Like you give me
Mhm.
one, and the two ideas he got were Pokemon and French Foreign Legion, and he wrote the Codex Alara series just based off of those two prompts from the crowd. So yeah,
Yeah.
just combined two things led him in this direction that let him make this cool series.
Do you think that publishers and agents still have this tunnel vision sometimes?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. The industry is, changing a lot. I recently saw. I think it's becoming more tentpole like Hollywood, where it's
Mhm.
more focused on fewer
Few
big names
big.
that they're good. So they're looking, I think, a lot for something that will be a mega hit instead of something that will reach readers and will find its market. every book is being sought out to be the one that becomes the next, big bestseller in all airports, which is a big shift in terms of how you look for books and what types of books you look for, if that's only really targeting.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that you mentioned Hollywood, Paul, because I see in the literary sphere kind of the same trap that I think a lot of Hollywood falls into, which is, I mean, obviously it's a business. They're trying to, and so they look at the trends of what has performed well in the past, and there will be some historical fiction movie starring Robert Downey Jr. and it does really well, and all of a sudden, all the executives say, "Well, the audience must really love historical fiction movies with Robert Downey Jr. in them. Let's put out 4 of those and see what happens," when really what the audience was responding to was like a good script and like passionate actors who were giving it their all. And I feel like the literary industry is kind of in that space as well, because they're saying, well, readers picked up Fourth Wing, readers picked up Twilight. Let's greenlight a bunch of books about vampires. Let's greenlight a lot of romances, and they're not looking at the level beneath, which is what the story was actually operating on, that drew people in. They're looking at kind of these superficial details, trying to capitalize on that, and I do think that's a mistake.
Yeah, I think you are right. Looking for the next trend, looking for the next blockbuster, looking for what's selling best, the next step, and then they do get
And the
television.
new bestsellers. Sorry, sorry, I'm just going to continue on this topic. Usually, they come out of nowhere, right? That's the thing. People aren't buying what they bought before. That's why the market continues to move. Is because a new book comes out that's doing something differently, and people flock to it because it speaks to something that they weren't finding in other aspects of their life. Nobody expects certain books to just take off, but then they do, and then the market kind of reorganizes behind them. It's kind of backward thinking. I think people should be trying to give readers what they will want rather than what they wanted in the past, and that's a much harder thing to do, but I think it's worth it.
Writing for the market. Interesting that you mentioned that. One of the crime fiction authors I heard at the panel discussion said he orientates what he writes on the market. He takes a look at the market and then he writes a book. And then there are those authors who say, "Oh, I write what I like, what I would like to want to read, not looking for the market, not looking for the sales, but what I would like to read."
I think
I think there's merit in both approaches. Paul and I kind of do come down more on, I think, what we want to read. But looking at our sales, I kind of wish maybe we'd prioritize sales a little more.
Well, but I think that you strike a line as much as you can. You write to your passion, but also, you do have to face the realities of what people are looking for and what does sell as much as you can, where you can. We had a prologue, and we were given a lot of advice that prologues are not very popular in the industry right now. But we felt the prologue was accomplishing a lot and was very important to the story. So, prologue is now chapter 1.
Yeah.
Does it change anything for us? Not really. It's still the same story. But if it helps sell the book, helps get the book out there, helps get engagement and interest, then, it's not a big sacrifice. I think finding where it's acceptable for you and where you can express your voice while still getting your voice heard is sort of the trick.
And I got the impression, having a lot of independent authors, this is something more and more, like I said before, authors discover for themselves. And there are lots of very good authors and a lot of books I absolutely enjoyed and I wouldn't have found or read otherwise. That's the absolute plus side of doing what we do. And they say those authors we had on the show who are independent say they keep it that way because it gives them a lot of freedom, means a lot of work, of course, for them, but it still gives them a lot of freedom they wouldn't have otherwise.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's no, there's no, I think, simple answer,
Yeah.
magic bullets. You just have to do the best that you can. And a lot of people want to write. It's which is understandable. There's something really magical and fun.
Yeah.
It talks about playing ideas off each other, about creating a world and trying to get people to buy into it and enjoy it and share your vision. But so many people want to do that. It's hard, there's whole industries of just trying to help authors get their voice out there. But a lot of it is sort of the readers. You can't always find the readers you would want, but you can, even a few readers, if they're enjoying your story, I think, give a lot of value.
Yeah. Do you think that the audience for sci-fi and fantasy has changed over the years?
Yeah, I do. I think that for fantasy, definitely there's a trend at the moment. Owen touched on it, which is that fantasy romance, I think, is really on the rise in the last 10 years. I think that's a big mainstream movement and moving a lot of reader interest, and I think meeting a demand that wasn't being as met. I think that there was the shift of YA that happened before, which is that recognizing that YA is a genre that adults can like in addition to young, and really sort of the expansion and massive growth of that genre, which I think was really driven by a lot of science fiction and fantasy novels. So I think that helped. I think that has ripple effects into books targeted towards adults. Too. I also think that we're seeing people. I think that there's been in recent years less fantasy I've noticed set in modern times. Not that there isn't any, but I think if you go back a bit, there was a lot more urban fantasy. I've been noticing that that's been a little less common recently. And I think science fiction has always been a little bit dwarfed by fantasy in terms of a lot of the discussions. Not that there aren't big breakout hits, but I think that of late, even still more, perhaps you hear more about fantasy than science fiction. In terms, those are just trends that
I think that in general, taking a more generalized look, both of these genres are bigger than they ever have been. I think they used to be kind of a nerd subgenre, and that thanks to some talented authors, thanks to movie phenomenons like the Marvel universe, I think a lot of new readers have been brought into the fold, and that it's less of a niche interest, and that's what's fueling a lot of these new subgenres like romance fantasy. People who liked romance are getting into fantasy and wanting to see those two things combined. People who are interested in like movies where a scrappy underdog main character kind of gets stronger are kind of fueling this trend toward progression dynamics in terms of a character's growth. I think that these things they change the market in some ways, but the original audience that used to be there is still there, and they still want to read books that they wanted to read before. It's just that we've broadened the pie, and now there's room for these other stories as well that other readers will flock to. under the banner of science fiction and fantasy.
Mm. What I always found fascinating about watching sci-fi shows and so on was the fact that the genre itself made it possible to touch upon topics which wouldn't be touched upon in any other genre. And that's what made it so fascinating. One of the things that made it so fascinating for me watching Star Trek, for example, or any other sci-fi show.
Yeah. Star Trek
Yeah.
had the first interracial kiss on
Yep.
television.
Yep.
And big moment.
Yeah.
Exploring ideas and things that couldn't be possible at the time, but
Yep.
might be looking ahead. And, I think even the things that people view as silly that are like, okay, well, this is obviously not going to happen. Your hover cars, your sci-fi ideas that people have that like, okay, this isn't practical. They still have value too, because they're looking to a dream, sort of. And what does that human future look like? What does that fantastical future or fantastical version?
Well, science fiction drives so much technological innovation. I mean, it's not a coincidence that our smartphones look like the data things in Star Trek, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
People read these things and they get inspired, and they think, "I wonder if this is actually possible." You'll read an article every 6 months or so where someone tried to build a lightsaber, right? Like, no one would do that if it weren't for this random idea that George Lucas had. Like, what if our swords were made out of plasma? Like, all of these far-flung ideas, like teleportation and artificial intelligence and flying cars, like they came from science fiction originally.
Yeah. I do have to admit there's one other show I absolutely enjoyed. Since we're talking Star Trek, it was not just Star Trek, it was Babylon 5. Guilty as charged.
No judgment.
I'm less familiar with that one. What's the premise?
It's a space station, and Earth maintains this station, and there has been this war with the race called the Minbari, and it ended in a peace put situation, and there is this looming danger, the so-called shadows. They're trying to take over the universe again, and they have to prepare for the next coming war, and they have to find the older races to help them fight against those shadows. And there's also the fact that our commander and his staff, they are all military on the station, and they also discover a conspiracy within Earth government, and there's another thing they have to fight against. And we have this Seeker, this telepath who can mind read and can control, people, matter, whatever. There's a lot of really things going on as well. Dark things.
I mean, I love that. It's
nice thing. But we definitely wanted to, when we were writing our book, tap into some, you also play off of some of what's in discussion at the time. Self-driving cars, big thing people were imagining, thinking about working towards. And we sort of took that idea and ran with it with some of the science, with some of the setup in our world building in terms of how cars move, and so I think there is even some, forward, backwards, take what's going on now, look ahead, and then that feeds backwards, forwards, in terms of world building, going to technological innovation, to building, and so on.
And gentlemen, working on book number 2, having written the beginning of this space opera, what would be your advice for anyone out there who would like to write also the next space opera or be an author in general?
I think that My advice would be to understand that it's not a fast process. Even if you're a fast writer, getting it out there, building it up, there's a lot of time and a lot of work that you need to be willing to put in, but that it's worth it, and that getting to hear about readers enjoying it, getting to uh, create something. There's not really, coming from an author, words to describe how meaningful that can be. So I guess my biggest advice would be to go in with some patience, with some calm, and know that there'll be a lot of hurdles, but that it's worth it in the end, no matter what challenges you run into. More practically, I would say don't rush your outline too much. Even if you're, people say there are authors who fall more into the let it sort of organically develop versus plot everything out. I think even if you're the more organically developed type, trying to understand some of things you might not think of when you're outlining more than the plot, more than the story. Think about your characters' arcs. Think about the pacing. Think about these sort of things that naturally occur but are so important to the story, that trying to even get those in from the outlining phase will really help develop your story a lot. That was some good advice given to me.
I would say that
Oh.
even if you don't end up publishing, it's still an important to write. If you want to be a writer, don't worry about whether you're going to sell, whether people are going to like it. Just focus on getting that story that's inside you, that's like making you want to put it down. Get that out, because that's the most important thing. And even if nothing happens with it, the fact that it exists is enough, really, and it will help clarify all sorts of things for your journey. Like maybe the next one you write will incorporate the lessons that you learned from this one, and it's all one link in the chain. But if you do end up getting published, if you do go that route, you are not just an author. You are a webmaster. You're a promoter. Like, unless you're really successful, you're going to be wearing all these different hats. And don't just focus on the writing aspect of it if that's the route you want to go, because there are so many other important skills that you need to know in order to get your work in front of the people who will most appreciate it. I have one last piece of advice, which is a little unfortunate, but it's where I'll leave. Is that probably don't write a book with your best friend. It worked out for us. We're really happy with how it went, but we didn't really consider the ramifications of what we were doing when we decided to do it. And if we hadn't gotten along so well, if our co-authoring dynamic had been a little more adversarial, we might have, like, not been friends at the end of this. And I'm really glad that we are. I'm really glad at how the book came out, but the risk, I think, was just not something that we considered going in. And
Yeah, you put so much of yourself out there. It's a very passionate project or thing, and it's it's hard when somebody wants to change it. And also, it definitely doesn't make it faster to write with someone else, because you have to work. It probably took longer because you have to rewrite each other's things. You have to style match. You have to agree on things. Now, there are a lot of advantages, as we talked on some of them, playing off each other. But it's definitely, I would amend his slightly. I mean, his, not saying his isn't valid. I would say, if you're going to work with someone else, go in with your eyes open. Know that it's not a shortcut, and that it's hard, and that it might not work out. But there are some advantages.
Yeah.
Oh, there's definitely advantages.
Yeah. Absolutely understandable. And regarding your plans, I mean, you said you are working on the outline. So when can your fans expect book 2 to drop?
I think probably it'll probably be a little while. I would guess.
Just to give some context, we finished our final draft of the book and turned it into the publisher. I want to say in 2000 or 2001. It took a really long time from that point for the wheels of the industry to turn and for the book to arrive on people's shelves. So even if we could snap our fingers and deliver
2021, right?
Was it 2020? It was one of the two. No, it was 2021. Yeah.
I think it said 2001, or at least that's what I heard.
Yeah, it's a long process. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's partially up to us, but it's also partially up to the people that are responsible for getting us cover art and putting us on films.
I think we're gonna shoot. It's more in the groove. It's more established, but I think 2 to 3 years is probably the time. As much as we would love to get it as soon as possible, it's in the outline phase now. We have to write it, and then it has to get fixed. So, but what I can say is that book 2, we've just about finished the outline. There's a lot of stuff that's set up in book 1 going to get paid off in book 2 in some really exciting ways, and I think are even like this. We're very excited about, and we're biased, but
we think book 2 is going to be incredible.
It'll be worth it.
Okay, even more fast-paced, even more adventure.
Oh no, actually, I would say we're kind of focusing on something different this time. It's going to be a little more slow-paced. Actually, we're going to give characters some time to explore who they are and what they want, and it's going to be kind of a more introspective story with a little more. We're going to spend a lot more time in one place rather than all this kind of adventures moving around. We're going to get to know one area really well.
Okay,
and it's going to be different, but I think it's going to be good.
So
there will be action and adventure though too.
Okay, so more work on the relationships between this new group of people.
Yeah. We've met them, and now we're gonna see them in a whole new light.
Okay, I see.
Yeah,
absolutely something to look forward to, gentlemen. Is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
Look out for, how we mentioned that B story had to be removed. We're working on that because that had been largely written, and that'll probably be released. That'll come sooner than book 2. So if you're chomping at the bit for more of this world and this universe, look for that. That says that sort of shorter. It'll be probably long novella, short novel range. And it's the story of a group of thieves, space pirates, who steal something that gets them into some trouble, and gets them dragged into a lot of the behind the scenes stuff of some of the big players in the galaxy, and their kind of struggle to make it out with their ill-gotten spoils. But they're a good group. They're an interesting group, and I think people who like our the book will really enjoy it. Their story is kind of as a fun companion piece.
Splendid. Wonderful.
I had something that I wanted to mention, but it is just out of my head now.
Oh dear.
So it'll probably come to me, half an hour after we hang up. So
that's always how it goes.
spending time on.
It happens. It happens. Gentlemen, it was an absolute pleasure talking to both of you. Thank you,
Thank you so
for
much
making
for having
it
me on.
possible. My pleasure, absolutely. And please don't go away. I just finish the recording. Dear listeners, dear subscribers, we hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as my guests and I did. Please don't forget to like, and if you haven't subscribed to our channel already, please do so. We hope you will tune in again at Book Lovers Companion. Until next time.